It's about the restoration of our republic. We want to educate, encourage, enable the power. We stand for integrity, honesty, self-reliance, self-defense, and most importantly, no compromise on our foundational principles. This is America's Voice Now.
Find America's Voice Now on Facebook and at americasvoicenow.org. Here's Michael Evans.
Good morning, America. You're listening to America's Voice Now. My name is Michael Evans. I'll be your host this morning. We've got a great show packed with information for you today, and we're going to bring you up to speed quickly. There are 4 different topics we're going to address this morning, and we're going to start out with the issue of public schools and how they have now officially banned parents from entering school grounds. In other words, what we are looking at is an indoctrination system that is, for all intents and purposes, taking parents out of the mix because you're not capable of keeping your child safe. Only they are. And it's a disturbing trend that appears to be running across the gamut. Yesterday there were uploads or stories in reference to the fact that school had started in many areas of the country, and in places like Chicago, the danger was so vast and significant that they actually created safe transport zones throughout the city so that these kids could get to school. And they had to be manned by civilian volunteers, paid school officials, and law enforcement. And one child was actually shot yesterday in a safe zone. These are zones where the parents are lining up to actually watch where these kids are walking on their way to and from school. And, the trend here is for schools to take the rights of parents away while they essentially, for all intents and purposes, declare dictatorial control over your child, their education, and, frankly, their indoctrination. So we're going to get further into that. Our second segment this morning is going to deal with Syria. And as you're probably aware, we are in the final throes of dealing with the Syrian issue here as a result of the news that chemical weapons were used, and John Kerry's declaration that in fact they were weapons of mass destruction used. They're gearing up. There are 4 destroyers now sitting off the coast of Syria, waiting to lob some cruise missiles in there. And we're going to explore the issue and determine whether or not it's actually in America's best interest to be involved in the Syrian conflict. I'm certainly aware and afraid of the circumstances that have affected the Syrian people. I mean, the tragedy of a chemical weapons attack in Syria is certainly cause for the world to lament another tyrant in the world trying to quash freedom. But the question remains, should the U.S. take action in a country that does not have any direct connection with our actual national security? Or are we getting into another quagmire, if you will? And so we're going to explore that a little bit. Our third segment is NSA and a recent revelation of a copyright infringement where the NSA is actually barring and blocking a company from using their logo based on a copyright infringement claim. Now, I got to tell you, that is so far off the mark. This company, kind of made a T-shirt up that said NSA, the only part of government that actually listens. And, it was a bit of a joke, and they were selling T-shirts with it. And the NSA sent a cease and desist letter to the company that was distributing their shirts. We're going to talk further about that and understand exactly what. And meanwhile, by the way, the NSA is involved in their own copyright infringement debacle, where they are using the Prism logo, which belongs to someone else, and they have not given that. They have not accurately provided the appropriate credit to the individual who is the owner of that logo. So we're talking about the pot calling the kettle black and the limitation of free speech in an effort to quell dissent, essentially. And that, again, is just another in the long, long train of abuses that we see on a day-in and day-out basis from this organization. Our fourth and final segment will deal with the issue of child pornography and the setup that was recently or attempted to be used against a number of groups. The first was the Oath Keepers, and then PANDA, which is the People Against the NDAA, and then recently another website where Luke Rudowski, We Are Change, and then fourth and final, Madison Rupert, endthelie.com. He also received emails from a purported whistleblower, and these emails contain child pornography. And what they were essentially attempting to do was blackmail these people or get them to open up these attachments in email that would essentially mirror those images on their hard drive so that they could later on call the police and say, hey, so-and-so has got child pornography on his computer, in an attempt to silence that kind of free speech as well. And so we're going to talk about all of those issues and the issues surrounding that. We're going to start with this school issue, though, and I want to get right onto it because there's a lot to cover here. Public school has started, and as you're aware, every fall we start school in multiple school districts around the nation. In recent, in less 2 days, school opened in Chicago, and it opened up in the Midwest across the board and many states across the country where there are serious violence problems, not only in the school, but also in those cities themselves. Chicago at this point is like murder capital. You'll note that all the cities that seem to have the highest levels of risk associated with violence are all essentially the same cities that have the strongest gun control laws. And they are run by liberal political organizations that have maintained a grasp on power in those cities for decades. In some cases, Detroit as long as 50 or 60 years since they'd had anyone from an alternative political party. And I'm not giving any credibility or credence whatsoever to the Republican Party. Both parties are out there to give us the illusion that we actually have a choice. But for the record, what we do know is that the more activist, liberal, progressive mentality is destroying our nation. Tomorrow, by the way, I'm going to talk about Common Core. And I got to tell you, and I'm going to spend a lot of time on Common Core tomorrow because I think it's critically important that we understand what Common Core is and the way in which they're using Common Core to manipulate the thinking and the thought process of our children, how they're using it as an indoctrination tool. And so we're going to get into that tomorrow. But the concept here is that the schools, as an example, in Dallas-Fort Worth have a new policy in place. If you're a parent, you're no longer allowed to enter the school grounds. In other words, if you are a parent who's bringing your child to school, you have to stay at curbside under a new ruling by Dallas-Fort Worth school systems. And they're not the only ones. It's just probably the most visible. During the first week of school, parents will have the opportunity to walk their young ones to class. However, a new security policy goes into effect after that. And the only reason they're waiting a week to institute this new security policy is because the parents have to be able to get into the school for registration and enrollment to take place. Essentially what this is this new policy is just another way for these public schools to inject themselves in and be an interpositioning function between parents and children and the family relationship. And what they're doing is the schools are telling parents, you may not go beyond the curb. In other words, once you've dropped your kid off from school, the kid belongs to us now. And you're not entitled to participate in their future, in their education. There's a parent out there who was quoted, and this is from an article on InfoWars, Alex Jones. and it's called "Public School is Now Officially a Prison for Your Children. Parents are not allowed to walk kids to class." It's posted up on our Facebook and YouTube channel, and Facebook and website. And as a result, yesterday I have a comment from a listener. I'm going to start posting the links to these stories in the comment section just so that people can refer back to them themselves. This parent here, Tamara Moore, says, "I really wanted to take my son to class since it's his first time in school. They may have security, but I want to know where my kid is going at all times. And yet the school systems are now stating that it's really not your prerogative as a parent to know what your kid does once they've left your care at the curb." So there's another parent, Angela Shamblin, who says, "As long as I can see him walk in that building, that's fine. Because once he's in that building, they'll take care of him." Ms. Shamblin, I have to tell you, I think you're making a serious mistake there. You know, this blind trust of a government that is obviously run amok and completely out of control is a dangerous precedent that we as a generation have set. And I have to tell you, I think it is such a serious mistake that we have an obligation to rectify that and rectify it as quickly as possible. In other words, what makes you think that the school is safe? I mean, let's look at it from this perspective. If you look at the recent school shootings, were they parents who went into those schools and committed atrocities? No. They were either students or recently, or, past students, but recently passed. So the question is, when you're talking about can schools provide security, the answer is obviously not. But in addition to that, we are pumping our children full of these toxic chemicals. We know for a fact that the ramifications of a lot of the pharmacological soup that they're being given is an experiment because we have no idea what the long-term ramifications of this stuff is. We also know that almost every one of the incidents where children have been committed or crimes have been committed in schools or these large mass shootings, whether they're in a mall or a school or wherever they are, almost invariably, unless it's Islamic extremism, in the case of the Fort Hood shooting, that the kids are pumped up and filled with these prescription antidepressants and these pharmacological rewiring mechanisms that completely distort their way of thinking and the way that the mind ordinarily operates. So the question here is, if you are a parent and you are blindly accepting the fact that the school is going to provide protection for your child, you obviously have not looked at the recent facts associated with these school shootings that have occurred over the course of the past decade or so. Secondarily, I don't care whether you think that the school can take care of your child. I, on a personal level, do not believe that the school is capable of taking care of my child, and I have absolutely no problem saying so. And I defy you, as a parent, to make that judgment call on my behalf. If you want to make that judgment call on the behalf of yourself and your child, that's fine. But don't try to make it sound as if you have the right to speak for everyone, or that your opinion should be adopted by everyone. In Richardson Independent School District, parents aren't allowed to walk students to classrooms, and they haven't been for years. The school system says it's just no big deal. The parents are just overreacting. But I got to tell you, I don't think they are. You see, the truth of the matter is, it's not even necessarily a question of security. Remember that security is always used as the excuse for the derogation of individual and civil liberties and rights. And so this is no different. They're utilizing the school system as an excuse, and security at the schools as an excuse to further put a wall of separation, a chasm, if you will, between parents and children. And, under the guise that perhaps a parent could get wigged out and go and commit an atrocity. Well, I got to tell you, I fear, in fact, if you look at the one area where the mass media and the Ministry of Propaganda has been lax about informing you about the true dangers, what you do need to look at is the total number of teachers of late, and an inordinate number of female teachers who have been charged for sexually abusing students. In other words, these are predators, sexual predators who have been going after students, and these are female teachers who have been arrested. And I mean, the number, folks, is almost epidemic. You don't hear about it because the press isn't telling you about it, but it doesn't mean it's not happening. It just means that the schools and the press and society in general and government and in large part don't want you to know that the real danger to your child isn't from the infinitesimal risk of an interloper entering the school grounds and committing an atrocity. It's actually the school itself. It's the teachers. It's Common Core. It's the education system. It's the indoctrination. That, ladies and gentlemen, is where the real danger lies for your child. And, you know, your child has a better risk of being injured physically on the way to and from school. And how can I back up that assertion? Well, in places where kids walk in more urban communities and environments, they are at risk, as that child was yesterday who was killed or shot in what was construed to be a safe passage zone. But in addition to that, you know, why is it that children are not forced to wear a seatbelt, or that seatbelts aren't even provided on school buses? I mean, you know, let's realistically look at, you know, there are more children injured as a result of school bus accidents and the failure of school systems and government, local government and community and city governments to institute the availability of seatbelts than anything else. And far more children are injured and killed in bus accidents to and from school than are ever killed during or injured during a school event. So, you know, the old adage here, it's not even an old adage. Look, the simple truth is this. Dropping your kids off at the school, being able to go in there and see where their education is taking place, interacting with their teachers, that's part of responsible parenting. And I don't care how many laws you pass or rules you pass or policies you create. I am never going to allow the school system to dictate the rules of my responsibility to my child, and you shouldn't either. We have a right to know what our child is being subjected to, I should say, in a school system. And you know what? It's not the school's job to keep my child safe. It's my job to keep my child safe from the actual number one perpetrator of damage and injury, both mental and physical, to my child, and that is the public school itself. You know, the realities of this are pretty clear. We have a situation where our schools are out of control in terms of what they're teaching our child, what they're teaching in terms of the Common Core curriculum. I recently went over a book that's being issued to my own high schooler, and I've evaluated it. I went over a number of in fact, I looked at every chapter. Pearson is the publisher of that book. That is, and they openly state on their website that they are a Common Core evangelist. And I got to tell you, I am so incensed about it, I'm actually considering pulling my high schooler out of school. Because, you know, and it's fraught with all kinds of issues. One, he's deeply involved in a lot of school function. And so, you know, am I actually harming him at this stage in the game? And, you know, with all due respect to many other parents and kids, my particular kids are pretty self-aware and pretty aware of where we are politically as a nation. As you can imagine, if they live with me, I'm pretty sharp to pretty wise about the education that they receive, and their understanding of the depth of where we are in terms of how far we've fallen down the rabbit hole. But at the same point in time, you know, the biggest lie told often enough and vociferously enough can become truth. And, you know, even military and CIA and NSA will tell you that, you know, given enough time and given enough persuasion, anyone can be brainwashed. I mean, in fact, we know that for a fact because they practice it on us. But in a war scenario where an officer or a military individual is captured, they can be made to turn and made to tell. And that can be done by a lot of different ways, not just physical torture. So mental and psychological abuse and torture are just as effective. And make no mistake about it, folks. What your child is going through in public school right now and what's being injected into their minds in the Common Core curriculum is absolute psychological torture. Your child is being indoctrinated in ways which you cannot even imagine. This makes the old days of the indoctrination centers in the Soviet Union look like, it's kids' play, because they're combining not only the indoctrination that they're getting in and day out process in the school system, but they're combining that with pharmacological drugs that your child is taking, so that not only are they using traditional tools to psychologically impact them, but when combine that with the pharmacological soup that they are given and the psychotropic drugs that are being fostered and given to them every day, man, you've got a dangerous, dangerous combination here. So I'm encouraging you to look into what your school is doing. One, participate in your school boards. Get on a school board, sit on it, get voted in and elected as a school board member. And then begin to take action from the inside. Demand accountability. Demand that Common Core be extricated and eliminated and excised like a cancer from your children's school systems. If you have children who are in public school, especially in the earlier elementary and middle school years, you have an absolute obligation to end that now. I'm going to show you tomorrow when we talk about this Common Core curriculum how desperately dangerous this is. They are pushing a progressivist education onto these kids that doesn't ever deal with the true facts of history. All it is subjective mind control in reference to the ideas of exposing them to the progressivist agenda and how advantageous it's been to our nation over the years. Concepts like feminism and how hard they push that. I couldn't believe how many times I saw the word feminism appear in the text. I mean, feminism is an important issue in our nation, and suffragette and suffrage and women having the right to vote and such. But it's not so all-consuming that almost every chapter in the book ought to be covering it. Really. And the idea that promoting the policies of the early progressives, along the lines of Woodrow Wilson and Roosevelt, and that stuff is historical, and we're not suggesting that kids shouldn't be aware of it. But we are suggesting that kids shouldn't be taught that that's the only view available. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is what's going on with your children every day. They're being indoctrinated, and make no mistake about it. When we come back, we're going to talk about Syria. You're listening to America's Voice Now. We're going to explore what's going on with Syria, how and why, and we're going to take a look at whether or not this is a wise issue for us to be involved in this. I suspect that this is a quagmire looking for a place to happen, and this is a neocon government looking for a place to kick off another war so they can jumpstart the economy and hide their true crime from us, the American people. We'll be back in just a few moments. You're listening to America's Voice Now. You can find us on the web at americasvoicenow.org. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/America's Voice Now. And this and every other radio program at youtube.com/America's Voice Now.